it in just in time. So thanks for the sponsors. Thanks for the audience already in advance. So who am I? I'm not going to talk about myself too much. My name is Antti Pajunen. The burden of pronouncing my name is solely on me. I am a Power Platform advisor at Forward Forever here in Finland, a BizApps MVP, a project operations and a Power Automate enthusiast, you could say. And on my free time, I enjoy whiskeys, spend a lot of time with my wife and 3 kids, and try to build cool stuff for the community and help the community get forward in project operations and in Power Automate. Now, I did realize that I didn't put in an agenda slide, which I usually do. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at a few different proof of concept examples for project operations and how we can do project operations proofs of concepts with Power Automate. And I'm going to cover some of the gotchas that I have. Like Raz mentioned, I try to use Power Automate to extend the platform because I'm not a developer. I don't write code. I don't even write HTML. I write JSON and I count that as code. So I try to use Power Automate to extend the platform as much as I feel confident doing so. And with that, the idea of this session is really to kind of give you some ideas of different approaches that functional consultants, and why not developers too, can take to leverage Power Automate to expand or extend projects. And it's not really in that sense app specific. The idea is to go over scenarios for what you can do and what you can't do, and then you could implement that for other first-party apps as well, like sales or field service or customer service, for example. So with that, let's see if I can get my slides to change. With that, I'm gonna on a very, very high level just mention what is project operations, because obviously this is an automation summit, and I'm not assuming knowledge. I'm not expecting for the audience, for you guys to know what ProjOps is. In short, it's an end-to-end professional services application. I don't know why I got automation in there. That's a typo. It's not an automation application. It's a professional services application. So it's basically meant for consultancies like Microsoft partners, for example. So we build projects for our customers, and we have a professional services business. So how in that professional services business can we, streamline our processes and make sure that our professional services business functions more efficiently? Well, that's partly what project operations helps us do. So it eliminates those data silos and disparate systems for organizations that are professional services organizations. And what it's built on, as you'll see in this presentation, one of these three pieces of the triangle doesn't work currently, like I mentioned. It is built on what was used to be project service automation on Dynamics customer engagement. It's also built on Dynamics 365 Finance, as well as project for the web. So it's really infusing those three capabilities into a single product. Now, what I do want to touch is what project operations does and what it doesn't do. Why am I explaining this? Well, the reason for that is that, if you don't understand what this application is good at, what it can do, and what it doesn't do, then the examples that I'm going to go through, those proof of concept examples, those will not make sense. So you could say that project operations is really, it's a good fit for different roles in a project-centric organization, right? So in that image on the right, you can see there's, we have account managers, PMs, resource managers, project accountants, and then directors / executives who oversee your operations. Now, it supports on a high level, you could say it supports a prospect to delivery to cash process in professional services organizations. What does that mean? It means that there's capabilities for identifying your prospect, building your proposals, closing your deals, and then planning on your projects and your resources, submitting your time and expense, and building your customer and project accounting. Now, what it doesn't do is it's not built to serve all industries, right? It doesn't serve in all industries. In general, it is professional services, but it's not for like specific industries like construction or law. It's not an application for law firms to take as it is. Law firms and that industry has its own nuances that would need to be factored in. It's also not a portfolio management tool, nor is it exclusively a PM, a project management tool for hardcore PMs who need like really, really robust features that's stuff like Microsoft Project offers. Now, kind of, again, approaching that concept of what are those proof of concept ideas and approaches, and how can we use Power Automate for that? There are blanks that us as partners, we representing a partner, us as partners need to fill. One thing is, industry verticals. If you serve law firms, then you need to extend the product to fit industry specific needs. There's naturally customizations, like in any Dynamics 365 project, you need to customize the system to some extent to fit to have it serve as a fit for your customers' requirements. And then one big thing is extensions for stuff and features that are not just yet in the product, but may either be on the product roadmap or there's ambiguity about the product roadmap that we don't know if the features are going to be there. So an example of extensions for project operations, again, we're approaching that proof of concept logic here. Extension examples could be CRs, which are change requests. The project scope increases, the customer says that that has to apply for more money. We have to submit a change request for the customer to process. That's one example. Power BI is a great example of extensibility that we have to make. There's really not too much BI in it, so all of that has to be built and extended. Another like pinpointed examples could be like a working time bank. So what's a working time bank? Well, it could be something where I have my extra hours. If I work 40 hours a week, and on one week I work 50 hours, then I have I have plus 10 hours to spend. Maybe next week I need to only use 30 hours or work 30 hours. Mobile apps are a good example. I saw Thomas had a Canvas app there, and I'm gonna like briefly show one of mine. I was like already kind of ashamed of what I've built compared to his. His is so cool. And then project templates is another extensibility example. We don't have project templates in the product. We would need to build those to implement that logic. Now, how do we fill how do we fill the blanks? What are some of the ways to fill the blanks? So Power Automate, that is one option, and naturally also Canvas apps. And the reason I'm specifically talking about Power Automate and not Pro Code is because Power Automate can really transform what a functional consultants in Pro can do. It really is, in that sense, a game changer. It's at least me enabled to take the platform to to new stratospheres, basically. So it's a very powerful tool, but with power comes responsibility. That's a cliche, but still, we need to think of scenarios where that really fits. And with that, it can really enable functional consultants to proof of concept the missing bits and pieces in implementation projects. So this is why I was kind of, laying the foundation and telling about those blanks that partners need to fill. What are some of those examples? Functional consultants can, with the low-code tools that we have on the platform, in a completely new approach that was not possible 3-4 years ago, do proof of concepts for those missing bits and pieces that would have required pro devs in the past. And in some cases, it's not just proofs of concepts; it can be actual implementations. And the examples that I have, I'll kind of give my own 2 cents on the examples that I'm going to run through, how I feel whether or not those should be actually implemented with Power Automate versus pro code, and why I'm geared towards one or the other. I'm going to explain that as well. Now, one of the really crucial issues is that when we talk about a complex first party application like project operations, or it could be field service as well, the functional consultants working on the product generally, I'm generalizing, but they generally know the data model very well. And that's because both, field service and project ops are both very niche, very specific, very industry specific, industry focused tools. And the data models are actually fairly complex compared to first-party apps like sales or customer service, for example, not to mention, the common data model and what we have in that. Another argument is that dev resources are usually scarce. And from what I've witnessed, those dev resources might be, I kind of want to use the word generic in the sense that they might not have a specific understanding and a specific focus on a single first party application, right? They might be, your CRM dev or your Dataverse dev. They know how to write code, right? But they might not have that knowledge of specific first party applications like project operations, because it is a complex application. But the functional consultants need that knowledge because they're working with a customer. I know this is very basic stuff, but still I feel it's necessary to explain it based on what I've witnessed in the market. And with that, I think it makes more sense to let the devs, code what needs to be coded, and not have them, spend too much time and energy on something that those consultants can do, because those consultants can these days go the extra mile in a way that wasn't possible before with Power Automate. So that, I think, is that transformational, in one sense, that transformational aspect. And feel free to not agree with me if you disagree. You know, I'd be more than happy to hear why why you feel the other way. Feel free to write that in chat, or even unmute yourselves and present your arguments. This is a topic I love to discuss about. And one thing is that no code proof of concepts can be really easy and quick to deprecate. I'm not saying they always are, and I'm not saying code isn't easy to deprecate, but those no code proof of concepts are they're sort of, they can be quick wins that we can tear down fairly fast if built the right way, without creating dependencies that then remain, or without forcing us to spend a lot of time tearing those dependencies and those proofs of concepts down. With that, I do think that you really got to pick your proof of concept battles, right? And this is general for not just project operations, but for the whole Dataverse as a platform, and for all first-party applications. You got to pick your proof of concept battles. And one of those battles to pick is, the event execution pipeline. That is something that is not generally in a consultant's toolkit. A functional consultant generally, if they understand what the event execution pipeline is, they don't have the tools to leverage that. So that is a pro code ProCode Pro. So that's one reason to kind of consider ProCode. And the overall time investment and complexity. Power Automate's a great tool, right? It's a great tool, but there are just so many examples and use cases where building a flow is, you know, 10, 20, maybe even 30 times more time consuming or complex than a dev writing that same thing in a plugin in C sharp. So really, you got to think of the overall time investment and complexity. I kind of fall for that when I do stuff for the community. I don't consider how much time I'm spending. I just, do what I kind of like, and then I do count the hours, and that's how I've seen that, sometimes those more complex things might be easier to let a dev do that, even if you got to explain the data model to them. And a specific example is if you're familiar with project operations or project for the web, a very good example would be the project schedule APIs. They can be a quick win for very, very simple scenarios. Simple scenarios being something like, let me create a project. Let me create 5 tasks for that project. That is something that's fairly straightforward for a consultant to do in Power Automate, to call those APIs via the unbound actions that are related to the APIs. However, if we have a more complex requirement for our proof of concept or our implementation, something like let's say that it's you got to build, you got to do 100 tasks, then that complexity increases so quickly that it makes more sense to do that in code, because creating a flow like that would just take forever. I can see that Rosemary has their hand up. Feel free to ask your question on mute, however you're able to present your question. If you don't, then I will just keep on going. All right. So if you do have a question, just let me know. Write that in chat, or unmute yourself. Unmute your mic. Now, with those proof of concept battles, again, this is universal. This isn't just for project operations in a sense. What you really want to do is evaluate your needs against the product roadmap, right? I can see partners implementing stuff that make no sense because the product team has things on the roadmap in 6 months, and their partners are implementing things that aren't even necessarily business critical extensions. So if you do projects, then ask for the roadmap, what's coming, is this feature coming or not, on the project operations Teams channel. There used to be Yammer, now they've moved on to Teams. And then again, it's the same for all first-party applications. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the changes that Microsoft's going to introduce to the project's data model are not going to break your solution. So an example of this, specific example of this is, if you're creating dependencies to scheduling, if you're still on project service automation and you're creating dependencies to your scheduling, well, you're gonna have a heck of a lot of problems when you're upgrading project operations, because it's just the data model does change, and the whole scheduling logic is completely different. And then one thing that I see, especially if we're not talking about technical solution architects, and in some cases, I guess, functional solution architects, consider the audience. So if you're building something for a few users, how does that scale? If you go to production, and your user base is 1,000 or 2,000 users, not to mention more than that, how does your proof of concept, how does it scale? How does it work? How does something like, we're talking about Flow, which uses the async service. How does throttling work in Flow, in Power Automate? If you're firing something off when you're creating record X, and in this example, I'm saying when you're creating actuals, you're approving time entries, and you're creating actuals, and you're in the course of an afternoon, you're approving 5,000 time entries. That's a big company. I get that. You'd have like a well, I don't know, big. You'd have like 800 or 1,000 employees maybe for 5,000 time entries, give or take. And you do that on a Friday evening. What is going to happen to flow? If you have an implementation based on Power Automate, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when you have 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 consecutive runs on Power Automate? What's going to do to the ASIC service? The answer is, it can be good or it can be pretty bad. So consider the audience and consider the scope of your POC to understand whether or not you can even take that to an actual implementation. So maybe something like this in time entries, again, you would be thinking, we're going to hit the service protection limits. Maybe it's better to do this with Azure Functions. Let a dev do this with Azure Functions so that they can, create a logic that stays right below throttling, right below the service protection limits. So you're not hitting those, even though if you're trying to shove stuff in the pipeline, that Azure Function is going to stay below the service protection limits. So with that, let's go to the actual examples. And again, I do need to remind you all that, if this isn't interesting, there's that fascinating curling game on for the Olympics. So that's another option for you all. But so let's jump in the ideas. So there's three different approaches that I've created. There's a change request approach that's not in the naturally it's not in the product in project operations, and then there's an invoice attachment approach and a time entry reminders approach. Now, as I'm going through these approaches, I kind of want you to think which are approaches that you think would be suitable for Power Automate versus for creating pro code based on what bits and pieces of the entire Microsoft cloud they touch. So if we think of change requests, this is a requirement that we hit when we do a pure professional services organization implementation, which is like every single time. So when a project scope changes and we need additional work to be factored in, to be added on our order on our project, that's when we need a change request. Now, there are some kind of out of the box based there's kind of like out of the box based logic that enables us to do this, but there's not a out of the box concept for change requests per se. And it is, like I mentioned, it is a frequent requirement pretty much in, I'd say probably in every single project that I've been in. And before we hit to the thoughts, let's actually jump into Flow and see how I have implemented change requests and what could be a proof of concept idea for change requests. Now, the nasty thing about this is, let me try to get the, let me come out of presentation mode. Well, maybe it doesn't matter. I'm seeing, the slides at the bottom, but maybe that's okay. So I was unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to run this flow because my project inside project operations has died for some reason. I'm not able to access project as of, I tried this 2 days ago and now it's not working. And I'm also not able to access SharePoint for some reason. I never thought I'd miss SharePoint this much. Oh, wow. I'm a CRM guy, by the way. So if we think of change requests, the idea is that we have a custom table in Dataverse. And from that custom table, we have a change request table that we can see right here. And what we'll do is we will append this custom change request table. Right here's the button. We'll append this to a project operations order and a project operations project. And how do we get to the change requests in Dataverse? That's another question. For the sake of example, what it could look like is something like this as a more, typical PDF document that we still pass along. And then this PDF document could be pushed in to Dataverse. We'd push this first to SharePoint, and then from SharePoint, we'd push this to Dataverse. How do we do that? We process this in AI Builder, and AI Builder would extract the bits and pieces that we see here. and the end result would be this. I have a blog post about this if you're interested in reading more. I'm not going to dive deeper into that logic now. And through that, we get the core elements of the change request, including what are those change request lines? What are those? Yes, what's the statement of work on that change request that we need to do in our project? What's the increased scope? So what we would do is we would append this CR to our order, and we'd have a flow that fires off, and the end result would be something like this. And again, project doesn't work. It's saying they've pulled project license from me, or my project license has been pulled, so I'm not able to call this. None of the APIs that are required for this, because they require for me to have a license. Otherwise, they'll fail. So I'm not able to actually run the flow. I have to demo this and show this to you based on what I created 2 days ago. So from that process change request, we would get a new order line in project operations. This would be that new order line. And then that new order line would result in additional project tasks. Let's see if I can get this to work. Let's hit Control F5 if for some reason it's just some outage issue. Let's see what this does. No, it's saying I don't have a license anymore. So it would create a set of project tasks that we have on our change request form. And we'd be done with that. That's a means of processing change requests, and that is a valid proof of concept idea that functional consultants could leverage. And now let me hit the slides again for thoughts on that, as I can just get my mouse to work. Where's my mouse? It is right here, and let me share my PowerPoint again. So what are some thoughts for that change request? Well, custom tables, easy to implement. We can deprecate them easily. Not a ton of relationships across. Simple to custom tables, relationships to project, and that's pretty much it. One thing is that execution from the command bar is done with an HTTP request received trigger. So that means that controlling that execution requires a bit of work. We might want to hide the ribbon button, the command bar button on execution, and then display them, once that change request has been appended to that order and that project. Otherwise, the situation that we'd have is we'd be able to smash that command bar button and just fire off that execution continuously. And that could naturally, in a tool like Power Automate, which is asynchronous, that could cause problems. So we would want to hide that ribbon button. Can consultants do that? Well, give or take, I don't know. Maybe that's something that we would need some JavaScript for, or maybe we need a developer for that. Another thing that is a bit bothering in this approach is, again, event execution pipeline. We don't have those different stages accessible with Flow. Flow is asynchronous, and that's it. So we don't have any pre-validation, right? So we're missing pre-validation completely. And the downside of us missing pre-validation, actually, in an example like this, is that we're not able to say whether or not maybe that change request has already been appended. Maybe we need to fetch some additional data from the related project and the related order and see if we can meet certain conditions for that change request to be sort of valid, so that we can fire it off. That's one big thing. And if project operations, then you'll know that on the order you have these flags that you set, include time, expense, and fee. And if you don't have those set up correctly, then you're not going to be able to use change requests, right? You're not going to be able to, carry on with this approach. So you would need a pre-validation plugin to check for existing conditions. And then, yeah, I mean, Flow async doesn't roll back changes. Flow doesn't roll back changes. Whatever it does, it does, unless we specifically, create a heck of a lot of steps in a fairly complex flow like this to actually roll things back. That's not really. I'm not going to say it's not possible, but it's definitely not not an option that's on the table easily. And then, one big thing for me is when we fire something off from the command bar, where are our notifications? And I kind of wish that this example would have worked, because I've built notifications with model-driven apps notifications, which are, they're decent, but they're not like Java. They're not as handy as JavaScript, right? So they don't serve us as well as JavaScript does. So those notifications, that's one thing where I'm kind of like, yeah, I mean, I can do a proof of concept, but how would I actually implement this in low code? I don't know. And then there's, if you know project operations, this does require adjustments to the time entry table. We have to make tasks on our time entries business required when we're using change requests, and we got to do that. If we're we would have forced them, and this, that concept requires JavaScript for us to be able to do that on that quick rate. And then again, we are calling the project scheduling service with the project schedule APIs. And if the CR is small, then that's doable if we have a couple of tasks. But it's excruciating if we have 50 tasks. If we have CR with 50 tasks, it's a lot of steps in Flow. It's actually like 50 steps, and then if there's dependencies, we have to parse the JSON, filter, erase, do a whole bunch of stuff in Power Automate. It's very time consuming to build 50 tasks with Power Automate for leveraging PSS. Devs do it faster. It's a heck of a lot faster to do on C#. All right, so with that, the second proof of concept example, invoice attachments. Now, the use case is that when we're listing time and expense entries, and especially when we're, when we are invoicing our customers by using Performa invoices in Dataverse, or in integrated deployment by using project invoices, having attachments for our time entries is a very frequent requirement, and there's no out-of-the-box functionality for that. So what's the time entry? What's the time entry attachment? What's its ID at? Well, it's essentially, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, I'm invoicing you for X amount. It consists of these and these hours done on the project by these and these people on these and these dates and hours, and so on and so on. Now, there's nothing to get that out of the box, so we actually need to either, for invoice attachments, process those in Flow, use paginated reports, use RS reports or SSR reports. There's different technologies that we can use for that. But Power Automate's a kind of a cool and an easy, a fairly straightforward way to get that thing done. And again, I'm going to switch out of my PowerPoint and back to ProJobs. And as you can see from my Canvas app, I'm actually red and green colorblind. And I have I'm not an artist. I don't draw. I can't draw. I can't draw at all. And you can see that from my Canvas apps for sure. So how do we process those invoice attachments? That's the big question. Like, how do we fire that? How do we fire that logic off? What is our approach? Is that approach tied to a Performa invoice, or is it tied to something else? So, kind of the proof of concept idea that I have is, hey, let's use a custom page, right? Let's use a custom page, and on that custom page, let's choose a project. This I had some problems with this as well, and I am fairly sure this will not work. At least it's very slow. Let me Control F5 out of this if we can make it work. Come on. All right, no worries. I'll explain it through. So what we'll do is we'll search for our project. We'll add our project. We'll add a from date, and we'll add a to date, and we will create an attachment. I don't actually have anything here. I was trying to find that specific project. Oh, here we go. Let's actually use this one. Maybe it was this. Maybe it was this one, and I wanted to try November, from end of November to beginning of November to end of November, and let's create the attachment. So the flow will probably fail because of the problems that I've had. It's probably not going to be able to create the attachment in SharePoint because my SharePoint's nowhere to be found. So in any case, we are, yeah, there you go. Now I get some work after this to figure this out. So in any case, let me drag and drop a Word template that I have as the basis. So what it does is it Power Automate leverages Word templates, and then what we have on in project operations, it'll use this Word template to create a Word document and a PDF, and then that PDF we can add as an invoice attachment. Now, ironically, I just, I have everything in that SharePoint, all the PDFs that I would want to kind of show you all. So that's not going to work. So you just kind of have to take my word for it and read my blog. It's all there and documented. So we would use a custom page to create that attachment, and then that would go to SharePoint, and then we could add that attachment by any means we want to add it to our Performa invoice. Now, what are some thoughts about the invoice attachment logic? Well, there's many ways to build attachments. So it's really again a decision on how much time do we want to invest in that POC. And do we want to use fetch-based RS reports, or do we want to build flows or something else? They all of these approaches take time, and especially with the invoice attachments in Power Automate, we need a consultant who's really is proficient at Power Automate and knows the data model extremely well. And then from a data model point of view in project operations, what's the source of truth for the attachments? Is it our invoice line details or our project approvals? So we have several different places from where we can get that information about the time entries that we want to list as attachments. And how do we run the reports? Do we run them from a invoice? What's the source of what's the source from where we'll fire off the creation of those reports? I think that a custom page could be a good approach. You could definitely make it more prettier than what I have. A custom page might be a nice approach. But then again, we do have to consider, if we're doing a proof of concept, how many moving parts do we want in there, and what are our people, like the consultants that build these things, do they know how to build both Canvas apps and flows? And then, a big question is, how pretty should the attachment be? Word templates versus fetch-based RS reports. And then one important thing is flow is not really good. Flow isn't good for complex calculations. It's not good at that. So if you need complex calculations, then again, that could be a pro-dev approach that you could do in pro-dev and achieve more complex calculations. If it's just like summing stuff up and maybe dividing something, we can do that in Power Automate, and we can do that with Fetch XML, which I've used in these flows. But if it's more complex than that, then maybe Procode. Now, the last one that I'm going to show you all is and Raz, I think I had about 50 minutes. Was that right, or was it 45? If it's 45, just let me know and I'm gonna wrap up. If it was 50, then I'm gonna keep on going.
Hi, Auntie. Look, so we've got till the end of the hour, but I know that we'll want some time for Q&A as well. So feel
Yeah,
free to go as long as you like.
I'll go for a few minutes. I'll go through
Sure.
this case and then that's it. So
Sure.
time entry reminders. So this is something where we really leverage the I want to say like the cloud as Microsoft Cloud as almost as a whole. So the use case is that people really they forget to submit their time entries for the end of the week, right? That in professional services, that just always happens. There's no escaping that. That's human nature. That just happens in business. And and somehow those people need to be reminded of submitting their time entries, if they have forgotten to submit them. So, remind people of missing time entries when their sum total for a week, which is, in my country, ours is usually 37 and a half hours. Remind me if my time entries are less than 37 and a half for a week. Or maybe and like in the UK I think it's 40, so remind Raz when his time entries are less than 40 for a week. That's not going to be a problem because Raz probably works like 70 or 80 hours a week anyways. Now PMs and managers, they need an easy way and an easy way to view to tell who is missing entries and where. And Power BI works great for that. So I'm not saying like don't use Power BI. I'm not just like this example isn't about Power BI. That's a great example. So that's just another route for this. And what I really want to kind of do in this use case is like like don't send emails, man. I just like don't do that anymore. Don't send emails of time entry reminders. Ping them on Teams. Like don't shame them by posting it publicly on Teams. Like ping them on Teams. Don't send them emails. That's not how the world works anymore. And with time entry reminders, let's hop over to my different tenant right here. So with time entry reminders, the idea is fairly simple. And let me like briefly give you a peek of the flow that we have here. And I've on purpose, I'm not dissecting these flows for these examples. I've got them all covered on my blog. It would take a lot of time to cover them, and I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be interested in watching me click through all the steps and flows. But this one I kind of want to show you. So on a recurrence, for example, on every Sunday at 2 p.m. Check for how many hours a resource has listed as approved or submitted time entries. Whatever your logic is, either look for submitted time entries or look for approved time entries. You can use both approaches, and then based on that, first off, you got to decide your time frame, right? So from Sunday, is it from a Sunday to Thursday, or what do we have Sunday to Thursday? This can't be Thursday. Maybe I've been testing something. Is it from Monday to Sunday, or is it from Sunday to Friday? And whatever your work week's like in your company. So decide on that first, and then check for your resources and their managers, and list the time entries per resource and see how much time they've submitted, and then if it's not enough, post a message in chat or channel as the team spot, and send the manager an HTML table to notify the manager of their subordinates who have missing time entries. And the way it works is let's fire off this baby by doing test, manually test. Let's see what happens. This is in another tenant. It's not touching ProJobs stuff in the sense that it should work. So let's see what my Teams is going to say. It's going to take a while. So this is something that I would you give this to a developer? Because now we're using Teams and we're using different bits and pieces of the cloud. We're not only using Dataverse here. So would you in an actual implementation, would you could you do this as a functional consultant, not just do a proof of concept, but actually implement it? Or would you give this to a dev and maybe have them use, I don't know, like either exactly the same tool, probably, or logic apps. I don't know if you can do this with function apps called Teams. Maybe you can. I'm not sure. I haven't tried. I'm not a dev. So when this finishes off, you can see that, Flow says that it's still running, but in fact, I've got 2 pings in Power Automate. So what it's going to do is it's going to tell me that I have my total is 37 and a half hours, but I've only submitted 28, so I'm missing 9.5 hours, and I can open my time entries. This is just an adaptive card. And then I'm also a manager for John Doe and Larry Laffer. So I'm getting, as a manager at the end of the week, I'm getting a table that says that, wow, these guys have been like slacking really, like properly. They don't have anything submitted. Well, it's only Thursday today, so we'll let that slide. So this is that time entry example, and to the final slides, to the thoughts on time entries. What you really want to do is you want to define, what do you want to push out, and when and to whom. If you're doing this for 1,000 people, then you want to do it the right way, right? And again, if you're doing this to 1,000 people, in your proof of concept, if you're doing this to 5 test users, and then in the end you're doing this to 1,000 people, does it scale okay? Do we have any scaling problems? And one thing with things like time entry reminders, from a logic point of view, like you want to make that stick. Like you want to decide on the logic from the get-go. Going back and forth just means that you're going to rebuild your flows over and over. And again, flow is not the best tool for complex math calc. So that's, you got to keep this simple enough. And maybe just saying this should be your sum total, this should be your total, and this is your sum total. Maybe that's simple enough. But if you try to do really complex calculations in flow, then you might hit a brick wall. And the positive thing about this is it's really great to be able to just use and create adaptive cards and post those in Teams, as opposed to sending boring emails to hundreds, not to mention thousands of users in Exchange. And then I was talking about that logic, like don't ping people unless you need to. Don't send them a message that says you have 37 and a half hours out of 37 and a half hours. Job well done. You don't have to submit anything else. Like, don't send that message unless you want to congratulate them on a job well done in general at the end of the week. No one wants to see extra reminders or extra information about anything these days. And, to sum it up, I think out of these 3 proof of concept examples, I think this is the most consultant friendly. I don't see any good reasons why to do this in code, because it is a recurring flow using not complex math to list those entries, and it touches all the clouds. I think this is the most consultant friendly approach, and one of those proof of concepts that you could take from a POC and actually implement it. So putting it all together, Power Automate can be a powerful enabler for functional consultants, but it can also end up taking a lot more code time than pro code if a proof of concept scope is too large and gets out of hand. And use cases that include Microsoft 365, Teams, SharePoint, Graph API, especially Graph API, those are really, really powerful candidates for Power Automate POCs. However, when we need those typical things like pre-validation and JavaScript, then we usually do fall into a code scenario, and we need to evaluate whether we want to do a hybrid of pro code and low code, or just have a dev do a pro code and be done with it. And when we play in the confines of Dataverse, and if we have a good dev who especially knows the ProjOps data model, like in field service cases, the field service data model, I could bet a couple of beers that a pro code approach could, and I'm generalizing, I know that, could be, I'm going to say eight out of 10 times, just going to wing it, 8 out of 10 times be faster than Power Automate if you got a good dev and if you need these, especially if you need these pre-validation JavaScript script issues. With this, I want to thank you for the time. Raz, thanks, man. Thanks to all the sponsors. Thanks for not hopping over to curling. We have free learning on 365.training. I have a intro to ProdJobs course over there. And with that, I am signing off from Finland.
Thank you, Antti. So I think there's only a couple of questions. Lots of great feedback. Mary's got a question, which is, can you use the web portion to connect to something like Business Central instead of finance?
I need to know what you mean by web portion, or do you mean the APIs, or I'm not entirely, do not entirely understand the question. Maybe if can you mute yourself and
Let's
ask?
do that. Yeah.
Yeah, the training link. Great. I'll share that in chat right away. Hope that one's still up so it's not taken down. Oh, that's going to be in big font. Oh yeah, you got it. So let me try to answer that in any case, even though I'm not understanding the question right. That's what consultants do anyways, right? Business Central requires integrating project operations with Business Central requires 100% custom integration. So the out-of-the-box integration that we have with finance and operations, that's leverages dual, right? That's out of the box 100%. BC is unfortunately requires 100% custom integration. And then you would not be doing that probably with Flow. No, you don't integrate BC to ProdJobs with Flow. There's too many transactions. You want to do a proper integration. Raz, are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any issues using the custom page to patch into the time entries table rather than use Flow. No, I mean you could definitely use a custom page to write to time entries. Yes, you could very much do that. There is a time entry mobile app, a Canvas app out by the product group as of just a few weeks back. I will paste that link in to this chat later, so you might want to check that out. You could definitely use a custom page for that as well. My example was listing, it was creating an invoice attachment. So I was looking at the front. I wasn't really interacting with time entries per se. Then there's when we need more compute power using code, could we use Azure Functions and combine it? Yeah, yes, we could use Azure Functions and combine that with Power Automate. Why not? I do have to admit that my first thought is that why would you then not do everything in Azure Functions if you're going to use Azure Functions? But then again, I'm not a dev, so I'm not saying that I understand if there's specifically something that you can't do in Azure Functions that you specifically need to use Power Automate for. But that's just my thought. Kind of if you touch on the code, then maybe you just want to run with the code in any case. But I know it's not that black and white. But these are just, this is my rambling. All right. So again, thanks. And if you have any other questions, feel free to hit me up on chat or on Twitter, DM me on LinkedIn, and I will paste that link to a Canvas app by the product team for time entries in chat in just a few minutes. Thanks for your time.
Thank you once again, Antti. And if you could just remember to share your contact details, whether it's your blog or your social media, so everyone can keep in touch with you, that'd be really good.
Yes, sir. I'll paste those in chat right away.
Fantastic. So that's Antti. Once again, thank you, Antti, for making this happen. I'm sure we'll be seeing Antti again for redemption when we do actually cover you in our next event where we'll be covering field service and project operations. So maybe you will get a chance to see it in action. So without further ado, we do have our next speaker starting in the next 2 minutes. Daniel, there we have him. Daniel, who runs the Flow Pro Show and many other things. So Daniel, whilst we got you for 2 minutes, would you like to share some of the things that you've been involved in the community? I know there's quite a lot of initiatives you're involved in, so it'd be good for the community just to find out a bit about that.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. I didn't list everything in there because it's a little bit too much to talk all the time about myself. But I am hosting a user group, for instance. I'm one of